نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's good to be back at UBC. It's good to be at the TMA. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that inshallah this coming year will be another successful and engaging year for everybody at the TMA. We start first with a lesson in ethics. One of the qualities of a believer is that he always has a positive opinion of other believers. So inshallah, we hope that if you're going to volunteer, that you're going to volunteer with a good quality as well. Now, it's been a while since we had the last session, and really this session is supposed to be a continuation from that session. I see some new faces, and maybe some of you who were there in the last session, a lot of the material that was covered there was also forgotten through the summer. So today I'm going to be reviewing quite a bit. The reason I'm reviewing quite a bit is because the material I presented was fundamental material, not only that I need for today's session towards the end, but also for the next 1 or 2 sessions. And really, I know the question is it possible for us to know God? And even though I'm dealing just with that question, my purpose is not just to answer that question, but my purpose is to empower you with some of the tools that you need to be able to not only analyze that question, but analyze any other question that you also come along later on. Now, one of the discussions that we started off with last time was, is it possible to know God? Does God exist? And most importantly, can you prove the existence of God? This question is very important, proving the existence of God. Because there are some theists out there that will say that yes, we believe God does exist, but you know what? It is not something that can be demonstrated logically. It is but a matter of faith. There are some people who have that faith and conviction in the existence of God, and there are some people who don't have that faith and conviction in the existence of God. And no matter how much logical argument you bring up for them, you will not be able to convince them of the existence of God. So, the existence of God, is it something that you can prove logically, or is it something that you cannot prove logically? Of course, we believe it is something that you have to be able to prove logically. It cannot be a matter of faith, or it cannot be a matter where you say, you know what, I believe in God because, let's say, a scripture says that God exists. Can you tell me why? Why can't it just be a matter of faith? You can't understand it, you just have to have faith in it. What's wrong with that?
You should have a reason to have a faith.
Why do I have to have a reason?
Why?
Yeah.
Because it's based on the logic that...
Well, why? That's my question. Why does it have to be logical? Why can't I just go up to somebody and say, you know what, just believe in God, and when you do believe in God, when you have that faith, you will know that God exists.
Well, you won't, actually. But then...
Perhaps, yes.
Because God has always taught us or to question things, right?
Now, that's a very cyclical argument, because you're telling me I should, God has taught me this. I don't even know if God exists.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I can just say, as human beings, we have a need to question everything.
Okay, yeah. Well, there are different arguments you can give for that, but one of the things that, I could say is, the next thing you know, I could come and tell you that your God is a 3-headed dragon. And you will say, well, what logical proof do you have for that? And I'll say, well, just have faith in it, and you'll come to believe in it, right? I could pull off anything if I don't base myself on logic and rationality. Secondly, why is it not enough to say I believe in God because, let's say, the Bible says so or the Quran says so? What's wrong with that argument?
You don't believe in the Quran in the first place.
Okay, yes. Same thing, right? So in terms of logic, what is that called? It's called a cyclical argument or a vicious cycle, right? How do you know God exists? Because the Quran says so. How do you know the Quran is true? Because it's the word of God. How do you know God exists? Because the Quran says so. How do you know the Quran is true? Because you can keep going over and over again, all right? So we have to be able to demonstrate the existence of God in a very logical manner. Not only the existence of God, but all the primary principles of our faith. The belief in God, the attributes of God. The existence of God is one thing, the attributes of God is another discussion. The belief in prophets, and the belief in the day of judgment or the belief in an afterlife, all of these have to be demonstrated logically and rationally. Now, there are many proofs for the existence of God. In fact, if you just Google it or you pick up some textbook, you'll see that there are about 8 to 9 different proofs for the existence of God. I don't want to cover all of them, and of course, all of them don't have to be correct. Only one of them has to be correct, and that's enough to prove the existence of God. Inshallah, this week and next week, and not next week, but next month and the month after, we want to look at 2 proofs. The first one we looked at last time, it was known as, in Farsi, it's known as Burhan al-Naz, or Burhan al-Nazm, in English known as the teleological argument. Teleos meaning purpose in the Greek language, or also known as the argument by design. Some very important questions. I want to look at 2 things. The first one being one of the critiques that David Hume, 17th century philosopher, had towards the teleological argument, and also want to look at one of the arguments that Charles Dawkins has against this particular argument. That we'll look at today partially, and then the other argument for the existence of God, a more powerful argument which answers a very important question, and I'll bring up that question towards the end of today's session, is known as the Burhan of Imkan and Wujub. The argument of necessary and contingent beings. One of the objections raised by Bertrand Russell, 20th century English philosopher, against the existence of God is answered by understanding the argument of necessary and contingent beings. However, whether you're looking at this particular argument or you're looking at this particular argument, both of these arguments are demonstrated using one particular philosophical tool. And that philosophical tool or logical tool is known as a syllogism. Anybody know what the word for a syllogism is in Arabic? Or in Farsi? If A is B and B is C, then A is C. What do you call that in Arabic? Tasalsul. That's a chain. Yeah, and if C is D, D is D, okay. Now, a syllogism in Arabic is known as a qiyas, or even in Farsi. But this word qiyas sometimes is used in mantiq, and sometimes the word qiyas is used in fiqh. And in both those areas, they mean completely different things. For example, you hear some hadith where we say, we don't accept qiyas. Qiyas is not from our practices. They're not talking about syllogisms. They're talking about something completely different. When we talk about syllogisms, we're talking about syllogisms or qiyas in the mantiqi sense. A very simple example of it is, if A is B and B is C, then A is C. Alright? So, for example, the classical example they'll give you in the textbooks is, Socrates is a human being. Every human being is mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal as well, right? Now, coming to a syllogism, there are 3 things in this particular syllogism that have to be valid for the conclusion to be correct. Can you tell me what those 3 things are? Now, this is known as the minor premise. This is known as the major premise. And this is known as the conclusion. For the conclusion to be valid, 3 things have to be valid.
Minor, major.
Okay, good. So minor premise must be valid. The major premise must be valid. What else must be valid?
Everything should exist. Should have A, B, and C.
Do you need truth or
Socrates was human. I am human. I am Socrates. What's wrong with that argument?
Conclusion has to be true.
Sorry?
Conclusion has to be true.
Well, yeah, but what makes the conclusion wrong in this case?
Do you mean true or valid when you were speaking of the premises being valid?
Well, if the if the premises are true, okay, and if the premises are true, the conclusion is true as well. If the premises are not true, but something else is true, the conclusion is valid for those premises.
Yes.
So one, it is correct, minor premise must be valid, major premise must be valid, and also the form of the argument must be valid. A is B, B is C, therefore A is C. When I say, Socrates was human, I am Socrates, the problem was what? The major premise was correct, the minor premise was correct, but the problem was in the form of the argument. So the form must be valid as well. Brings us to a very important conclusion over here. Every argument has what we call a madda, a substance, the content of the argument, and every argument also has a surah, which we call the form of the argument. For the argument to be conclusive and valid and true, the substance has to be valid, the form also has to be valid. All right. Now, we also say one more thing before we move on. We say that there are two areas of study. The first one is mantiq. Mantiq means logic. Traditionally, in the system of the Hausa or in Islamic classical teachings, there was mantiq, and mantiq told you which forms are valid and which forms are not valid. You only see one form over here. I can make 16 different forms using 4 of the or 3 of the variables that I have on there. Which forms are valid, which forms are not valid. Mantiq looks into that. But then there's also another field of study that doesn't look at the form of the argument, but rather looks at the content of the argument. How do you know that the content is valid? And that field of study was called? No, not falsafa. Yeah, it's a particular aspect of falsafa. It was called ma'rifat shanasi, or in English known as epistemology. Now, I do have the notes from last time. Would you like me to give them out for you to follow? Okay. Now, you do know when you're tired, you print the same page on both sides, so just forgive that. Okay? What we'll do is I'll drop a couple here. And, I don't even know what happened here. Yeah, it says pages, so, you know what, let me just put it apart. These two, these two, these two, these two, these two, and
I still need a second page.
you need a second page. This must be your copy. Okay. All right. Now the notes are not in any particular order. I have reviewed the notes, so I'm presenting with a different order. But just in case you go home and you're wondering what I was blabbering about, then you can read those notes and you would understand, hopefully. One more thing before we move on to today's discussion is we also say, in terms of the content which is valid, we say a premise is valid if it is made of valid arguments or it is itself self-evident. All right? So for example, if I have a premise, an argument, I can prove it usually using an argument. A is B, B is C. It is the conclusion of an argument. But not all premises are like that. And they can't all be like that, right? Because you have an argument, you rely upon, let's say, a syllogism to prove that argument. That syllogism has 2 premises in it. Suppose those 2 premises are proven using 2 other syllogisms. At some point, as you go back down the chain, it has to stop somewhere where the premises are not proven using syllogisms. Rather, those premises are your building blocks In mathematics, you call them your axioms, right? Your primary premises, which don't have an argument to prove them. They're just self-evident. Now, these self-evident arguments, according to logicians like Aristotle and Ibn Sina and Farabi, they say they are of 5 types. I don't think you have these in your notes, but you might just want to quickly make a point of them. 4 and 5. They say some of them are known as primary premises. What you call in Arabic awwaliyat. This is a premise. Or badihiyat. This is a premise where you think about the subject, you think about the predicate, and you come to realize this has to be right. It doesn't need an argument. For example, the law of contradiction. This particular cap that I have cannot all be black and all be white at the same time. I dare you to bring up a syllogism to prove that. You can't. It's one of the most primary building blocks of all knowledge that we have. And it's something that you just, the moment you think about it, you come to realize, you know what? This has got to be correct. Okay? That's a primary premise. Second example that they give us is something that they call a fitriyat. Innate premises. Sometimes they're known as hadasiyat as well. A strong, educated guess. So strong that you become sure this has got to be correct. The example they give is an interesting example. You know Khaja Nasiruddin at-Tusi, all right? Khaja Nasiruddin at-Tusi was a great scholar, great philosopher, great ethicist, but also a wonderful mathematician and a wonderful astronomer as well, and a politician at the same time. We hear that Khaja Nasiruddin at-Tusi got the Mongols who destroyed the library of Baghdad and burned it down. He got those Mongols to commission and pay for his astrolabe that he had, that is located somewhere in the Maragha astrolabe. Exactly, that one, right? Now, from the Maragha astrolabe, sometimes they used to look out at sea. And when they would look out at sea, they would see when the ships are coming in, first you see the mast, and slowly you start to see the rest of the body. It wasn't the case that you saw the whole ship, a small, size of it, and then as it came closer, you start to see it bigger and bigger. From that, they came to realize that the curvature of the earth is not flat, because if it was flat, you would see the whole ship, a small size, and as it came closer, the whole ship, a bigger size. Rather, it is curved, and that's why you first see the mast, and you don't see the rest of the body, and as it comes closer to you, you start seeing the rest of the body. Now, when they looked out at sea and they saw this, they came to quickly realize within themselves that, you know what, this is a curve, a surface and not a flat surface, all right? Now, this is one of those fitriyat or hadasiyat. The third is something which is empirical. Empirical, all right? So, for example, when I look and I see this cap, it is black. There's no syllogism to prove that. With my eyes, I saw it is black. Or when I touch a piece and it's hot, there's no argument for it. Empirically, using one of the 5 senses, I came to know that this is hot, or this is red, or this is loud, or this is what they were saying, for example. The fourth one, and this is the most important one for me today, is something which is experimental. Also known as tajrubiyat. All of science is based on this. If you can't accept that using experimental knowledge we can know the world, then even science comes into question. What's something that's experimental? Empirically, you observe 2 things happening over and over again. You observe a cause and you observe an effect. Repetitively, you come to the conclusion that this is the cause of this effect. For example, empirically, you take different types of metals and you put them close to a fire or close to a heat source, and you come to realize that the metal expands. Right? When you do that over and over again, 100 times, you come to the conclusion that heat causes metals to expand. Where does that conclusion come from? Is it an awwaliyat, a primary premise? Of course not. You have to experiment. Is it a fitriyat? No, it isn't a fitriyat. Is it empirical? Well, part of it is empirical. You had to observe it for yourself, but one-time observation wasn't enough. You had to repeat it over and over again to come across this conclusion. All right? the cause, now listen to this very carefully, the cause has to be observed empirically, the effect has to be observed empirically, and the relationship has to be observed over and over, repetitively, for you to come to the conclusion that, this premise is valid, that heat causes metals to expand, for example. And the last one is unanimity. Unanimity can also bring about certainty within a premise. Right? For example, a guy walks in and says there was an explosion near the, the CME building. All right. One person comes and says it to you. You don't believe it. An explosion here at UBC. Which terrorist would want to target UBC? All right. And then another person comes in and says there was an explosion. You go, okay. There's a greater probability, a 60% chance. How about if 20 independent people came and told you there was an explosion near the CME building? At that point, you start believing in the premise that there was an explosion at the CME building. All right, so about 5 of them in total. But the most important one for me for today, this one, and this one, and this one. All right? Are we clear on this so far? That's a very quick review. All right, awesome. Now, coming back to the argument that we wanted to demonstrate today, the argument was known as the argument by design. And before we start this argument by design, I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you that the argument by design is formulated using one syllogism, whereas the argument we look at next month, which is known as the argument of contingent and necessary beings, is formulated using 2 syllogisms. So today we're only looking at one syllogism. And before I get into that, many of you have heard of this argument by design, right? You say, look at the world around you, it's such a design structure, therefore it proves that there must be a designer who designed this design structure. First thing, tell me, what's the purpose and the goal of this argument of by design? What do we want to prove? In simple words. We want to prove that there is a creator. Right? What I found interesting is that also atheists believe that there is a creator. And they call it Mother Nature, for example. Or they call it evolution, for example. So what's the difference between our belief and their belief?
There is intellectual creation.
Excellent. There is a sentient designer. There is a designer that has thought, that has its own will, that thinks for itself, that's an intelligent designer, and not just any mechanism that brings things into creation. So first thing that's very important to recognize, the goal in this argument by design is not just to prove the existence of a creator, rather to prove the existence of a sentient creator. And you had a question?
No, I just had a comment. Isn't it like the second thing that we believe in is the existence of a wajib al-wujud? I don't know how to translate it.
That one will come to next month, inshallah.
Oh, that's
Because wajib al-wujud comes from the proof of imkan al-wujud.
Oh, so
Okay, so let's take it easy.
Right.
Alright. Argument by design. Farhan of Naz. You know what the purpose is. Now, let me just give you a couple of minutes. Why don't you draw up a syllogism for me, where the conclusion goes this way. Here's the conclusion. The universe has a sentient creator, or something like that. All you have to do is come up with a minor premise and a major premise for me. Remember, they both have to be valid, and they have to be in the right form as well. Shouldn't be too hard. If you've got one in your mind, just blurt it out.
You're looking for minor?
I'm looking for a minor premise and a major premise, both of which are valid, in the right form that I can come to the conclusion. Because look, if you come up with a major premise that is true, and a minor premise that is true, and they're put into the right form, nobody can escape from the conclusion. Whether you like it or not, you've got to accept the conclusion. If you don't accept the conclusion, not only do you question your belief in the existence of God, a person has to question his belief in anything and everything. Right?
So say the world.
Every system needs intelligent designer. Every intelligent system needs intelligent creation.
Okay.
And the world is intelligent creation.
Yeah.
Okay, so the world is, the universe is, I'll make it easier for you. You kind of got the order flipped, but we'll start with the minor premise. This is known as the sughra, this is known as the kubra. The kubra is usually a kulli, it's a general
Yes.
statement. So the every will come here,
Mhm.
all right? Right? Every human is mortal, for example, right? The every will come here, but here, the universe is what?
Is intelligent or?
Don't try to use loaded words. Try to use a little simpler words. Because then you use the word intelligent over here, and then use the word intelligent over here, and it doubles up, and it becomes circular at a while.
Harmonized?
Okay, let's just say is a design structure, or has, I'm going to give you a simpler form. Let's start with the simpler form of the argument. You will see that the simpler form does run you at some point into trouble. We'll give you the more, subtle form of the argument. The universe has design structures. Okay? Well, this has got to come here.
Every design structure
Every design structure.
need designer.
Good. Needs a
Designer.
sentient designer or creator, whatever it is. The conclusion, the universe has a sentient creator. The form of the argument, as you can see, obviously is valid. 1/3 of the work is done. This is beautiful because all I have to do is to prove the minor premise and to prove the major premise, and nobody can escape from the argument. It's also beautiful to have this in your mind because sometimes you're talking to somebody and they have an objection to the existence of God. If you know what the argument is, you quickly come to realize this person's objection, is it in the major premise, or this person's objection, is it in the minor premise? Which premise they haven't understood. But unless you have this structure in your mind, you really cannot appreciate what the other person is trying to argue. All right, so 1/3 of our job is done. All is left is to prove this and to prove this. All right, I'm going to go quickly through that because what I want to do today is I want to come to David Hume's argument. All right, let's start with the minor premise. The universe has design structures. Now, of course, you'll show me that, look, there's so many design structures in the universe, which is correct. But tell me one thing, what's a design structure? How do you define it? What's the difference between a design structure and a non-design structure?
System, all of the components of the system are matched together and follow up the aim.
All the components have a meaningful relation with each other.
Just keep this in mind. What you're saying is correct. Multiple components. Right? You just can't have one thing, right? It can't just be like a rock or something. A rock is even multiple components in itself, but it can't be a simple thing. Working together for a
For a same aim.
For a purpose, for an aim. That's why it's called the teleological argument, the argument by design, or rather the argument by purpose, that there is a purpose to everything that we see around us for a purpose. So, for example, when you look at a clock is a design structure because there are multiple components, yes. Do they work with each other? Yes. For a purpose? Yes, and the purpose is to tell time, for example. Now, when you look at the world around us, do you see design structures? Nobody can deny that you see design structures. You don't even have to look at the world around you. You just have to look within yourself. You look at your eye, you look at your ear, you look at your heart, you look at your body as a whole. These are all design structures. You look at the eye, multiple components, starting from the outside of the eye, going to the lens, the cornea, looking at the retina, the cones, the rods, everything put together, the electrical impulses or the optical impulses, the way they're converted into electrical impulses, going into your brain, multiple components, definitely multiple components. Working together, well, definitely working together. For a particular purpose, yes, of course. The purpose is to be able to see, right? The same with the ear, the same with the rest of the body, the same with the forest, for example, the same with the solar system, multiple components, working together in tandem for the purpose of, subsisting life, for example, or, making sure there is the sun and then there's the earth and the two don't, for example, collapse into each other. All right, so the universe has design structures. There's no doubt about that the universe has design structures. Every design structure needs a sentient designer. Alright? Now, at first, this seems self-evident. Remember a hadith where somebody came to the sixth Imam and said, prove to me the existence of God. And the sixth Imam said to him, you see that boat that's over there? Let me tell you a story of how it came into being. The way it came into being was some planks of wood just fell off a tree, and they were just of the right size. And there were some pieces of metal down on the ground, just of the right type. And these pieces, when they fell and the wind blew, they all came together into one particular form. And when the wind blew, even the metal pieces went exactly right in and made this beautiful boat that you see. And the man goes, that's a big story, what a story that is. He goes, well, how can you not say you can't accept that, but you can accept that all the design structures that you see in the universe, they came into being all by themselves, right? So it seems an argument which is very much self-evident to us, all right? I want to point out one thing over here before I come to Hume's critique of the argument. Okay? One more thing over here that I do want to point out is every design structure needs a sentient designer. We don't say that the sentient designer has to be the direct agent. Okay? For example, a clock. It could be made by a clockmaker, all right? You need a sentient designer to make a clock. Nobody would believe a clock came into being and there was no clockmaker. I'll say, yes, sometimes a clock can come to being without a clockmaker. Today, clocks or watches are not made by people, they're made by machines. There, your argument was disproved. What would you say? Who built the machine? All right, so who built the factory? I've got an answer for that as well. The factory was built by this mega factory that actually produces factories. What would you say?
Who built that?
Who built the mega? So at some point, it goes back to a sentient designer. The mind just doesn't accept that without a sentient designer, you could have this. Now, this is a very important point because sometimes somebody comes and says, well, you see all this design structure, it all came into being because we've got a factory called evolution or the mechanisms of evolution. And we say, not a problem at all. Evolution itself, is it like a design system? Is it like a structured system? Or is it an unstructured system? We all believe there are particular laws that run evolution, right? We're trying to understand those mechanisms. So indeed, it is a structured system. It is a design system. My next question is, who made evolution? All right. So the theory of evolution, I strongly believe, if it was developed within Muslim lands, it would never have caused any problems between religion and science. It's only because it grew up in the Western land that it has created all this big issue about, the existence of God and whether evolution negates the existence of God or not. For us, theory of evolution, from the perspective of the existence of God, is not a problem. It could be a problem from another perspective, which is the scriptural perspective, the genesis of man, right? Because we believe Prophet Adam was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereas evolution says, well, he wasn't created instantaneously, he came and he evolved from simpler life forms. Any case, so leaving that aside, every design structure needs a direct or an indirect sentient designer, all right? If you prove that, the universe has a sentient designer. So far, are you with me? We're still reviewing, all right? We're still reviewing. Now,
I have a question.
Yes,
If I
yes.
can. Just this convention.
So let me be with you.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
The 5-point convention that you've adopted here.
Yeah.
What is the origin of that? Like, what school of philosophy?
That would be Aristotle's school of philosophy.
Okay.
Of course, all the philosophers have their own slight, subtle different opinions. Some will say there are 5, some will say there are 6. They also add, for example, some of them hadasiyat. Some say no, it's just a strong fitriyat or whatever it is. Aristotle's school, which is known as the Masha'i school, the peripatetic school. And in the Muslim world, the one to actually, bring the Aristotle school in to the Muslim world first was Farabi, the father of philosophy in the Muslim world, and after him was Ibn Sina.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Let's start with a simpler example, then we come to a more difficult one. And this example has its roots back in an Iranian tradition. All right, some of you might even know the Farsi, whatever idiom that goes with it. They say that a person came along and he saw walnuts, and he saw walnuts. They were up on the tree and they fell down on his head. You know, so he'd only seen walnut trees. Now I'm making some of it up myself, right? He only saw walnut trees, right? So he said, well, you know, all the fruits that I come across, they all grow on trees. All right? Then he comes across a watermelon. And he's never seen a watermelon tree in his life. And he goes, I really don't want to ever pass under a tree that has a watermelon tree. Because, you know, if a walnut can hurt me a little bit, imagine what a watermelon can do to me. All right? Of course, watermelons don't grow on trees. They grow on vines on the ground. All right? Now, the point being over here, what this person did was, he only had seen walnut trees. And therefore, he made up his mind that, look, every fruit, not just walnuts, but every fruit has to grow on a tree. When he came across a watermelon, even though he didn't know where watermelons grow from, he said, well, this watermelon looks like that walnut, therefore this watermelon must also grow on trees. It's a fruit, like that fruit, all right? Hume says that's what you've done, actually. Now, of course, he doesn't know about this example that we're talking about, but Hume says this is what you have done exactly. What you have done is you've looked at things which are artificial, things which are man-made. And you've come and you looked at a tree, you looked at, for example, a car, you looked at a clock, you looked at a machine, and you saw that all these designed machines and components that we have, you came to realize that none of them could ever come into being without a sentient designer, all right? Then you took this particular set of examples that you had, and then you looked at the whole universe, all right? Now, the whole universe is not man-made, you say. It is made by some other being, you say, okay? You said, look, the universe is a designed component, just like these other artificially designed components that we have, and because these artificially designed components had always a sentient creator, therefore we also assume that the universe will also have a sentient creator as well. Because that's the same thing like the walnut and the watermelon, right? What you need to do is to look at a lot of watermelon trees, right? And say, look, the watermelon doesn't come from trees, it comes from vines, for example. Then when you come across another watermelon, you say, this watermelon must also come from a vine. What you need to do is to look at multiple universes, and if you see that all of them have been created by a sentient designer, then when you come across another universe, then you can tell me that that universe was also made by a sentient designer. But you haven't looked at the right subset. You just look at a very small subset, which had a likeness to the issue that you are looking at, and you applied whatever was here to whatever was there. There's a problem there. Did you understand the argument? Yeah? You said you got tricked. You looked at artificial things, and whatever you understood of artificial things, you used the same argument and you applied it to natural things as well. Your subset, the one that you studied, was of artificial things, not of natural
What
things.
do you mean by artificial?
Man-made things.
Man-made?
Yes.
No, we're not looking only at like man-made things.
No. How do you know, when we talked about this, every design structure needs a sentient designer.
Oh,
Where did you know that from? You knew that by looking at a clock. You knew that by looking at a car. You knew that by looking at a machine. You knew that by looking at, I don't know, a pen. These are all man-made structures. So yes, when you come across the next man-made structure, you can say, yes, it had to have a sentient or artificial structure. You have to say that, yes, it has a sentient designer. But you can't use whatever you've understood here for natural structures. For that, you have to open up a new subset. Look at all natural things. Show that all natural things need a sentient designer as well. And then you can prove that even this universe has a natural designer or a sentient designer.
The argument has to be logical, because about the watermelon, it's not logical for a watermelon to grow on trees, because it would fall. Whereas what happens with the universe is...
By the way, for watermelons, they don't grow on trees, but they are heavier fruits which have spikes on them that I've seen grow on trees. Yeah. Jackfruit, look it up. But that's what it says, that look, your watermelon example was illogical. Similarly, this natural world example is also illogical.
It has to follow the same rule here.
Well, what has Hume done? Can you tell me? What premise has he questioned? The first or the second? Well, obviously the second one is questioned, right? He's saying every design structure needs its ancient designer. He says, you've proved to me that every artificially designed structure needs its ancient designer, but where's your proof that every natural structure also needs its ancient designer?
Well, one thing that we could say is that both natural and artificial things are, they're both follow the rules of logic in this world. So in this way we could compare both of them. I don't know, it's like they both are in this world, and then
Yes.
this world follows some logical rules, or
Sure, the world follows logical rules, but can you prove to me that any natural object is the same? It is similar, but can you prove it is the same as an artificial object?
we don't have to prove it.
I think it's similar to the Imam's sixth Imam that you just said.
Yes.
Instead of artificial both, you can apply that to a tree, for example. So just everything fall down.
Yeah.
How can you prove it's not the case?
Yes.
So I think its argument is valid.
See, I know you understand the argument from within you, but the question is, can you express it? Can you demonstrate it using logical tools? Now, today I went through the trouble of reviewing all this material is because these are the tools that you need to demonstrate that, this argument that we have is very much correct. Now, that is one of the things I really appreciate about Shaheed Murtaza Mutahari. If you read the works of Hume, you wouldn't be able to break it down the way Shaheed Mutahari breaks it down. But Shaheed Mutahari had a very strong understanding of these logical tools. So when he came across the work of Hume, and he used to read those books after they were translated into Farsi, he broke it down first. And he said, Hume, in terms of our logical structures, this is your argument. And then once he understood what the argument was logically, he then broke it down and said, actually what you're arguing is not correct. And that's what I want to do here. Before I come to that though, what was Hume trying to do by disproving the argument by design? He was trying to disprove?
Conclusion.
Sorry?
The conclusion.
Which is?
There is a creator.
Right. Except I believe Hume was a believer in God. What was he trying to do? He wasn't trying to disprove the existence of God. He was trying to disprove a logical argument for the existence of God. Hume was saying it is a matter of faith, a matter of conviction, a matter of belief. It's not something you can prove logically. All right? That was his goal. All right. Now, coming back to here, then Shaykh Mutahari says that Hume, what you have actually said to me is that this particular premise that I have, according to Hume, which one is it? Is it a primary premise? Is it an innate premise? Or is it an experimental premise? Experimental premise. It says you looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, you saw cause, you saw effect, cause, effect. Then you say, when I look at this one, I see an effect. Even though I can't see the cause, I come and I say that this is going to be the cause. For example, I see fire and metal. I see fire, metal expanding, right? After a while, I'll come see a piece of metal where the metal is expanding, but I don't see a source of heat. I assume over there that there must be somewhere within this metal or around this metal a source of heat, okay? So, Shaykh Mutahari is saying that what you're arguing is this particular major premise is a premise which is an experimental premise. He says, let us break it down. What's an experimental premise? In an experimental premise, two things have to happen. One, you have to empirically observe the cause, in our case, the heat, and you observe that with your hand, for example, it feels hot. Two, you have to empirically observe the effect. In our case, it is expansion. And the third thing also is you have to observe it. Repeatedly. Thank you. In both cases, they have to be empirically observed. All right? The heat has to be empirically observed using one of your five senses, and the effect has to be empirically observed using one of your five senses. Only when both the cause and the effect are empirically observed can you say that this is one of those experimental premises. All right? Okay. Here goes. Now, let's come to our major premise over here. We're not even looking at this major premise. Let's say we're not even looking at natural structures. We're looking at artificial structures. In an artificial structure, let's say you look at a cell phone, all right? Or one of these things, okay? What is the effect? The effect is a designed structure, which has a purpose. What is the cause? A designer, a human being, okay? The effect is a designed structure. The effect, can you observe it empirically? Purpose, is it something you can observe empirically? With which sense do you observe purpose? With your eye you observe purpose? With your hand you observe purpose? With your mind you observe purpose. So first of all, your effect is not even an empirically observable effect. Okay? 1. 2. What is the cause, you say? The cause is a human being, right? Not just a human being, but a human being who thinks, right? A sentient human being. Tell me, how do you empirically observe sentience? How do you know that I think? With what? With your eyes you see? With your ears you hear my thinking? Even if you cut me up and see my brain, all you see is my brain. How does that prove that I think? How does that prove that I'm sentient? It doesn't. It's only by looking at my effects that you come to realize that I am sentient. Therefore, this particular argument, the major premise is not one of the tajrubiyat. To be a tajrubiyat, both the cause and the effect have to be empirical. Therefore, what is it? It is one of the awwaliyat. And that's why all of you were telling to me, but no, we know this, right? Why were you saying we know this? You were saying we know this because it was one of the awwaliyat. And once it becomes an awwaliyat, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at artificially made structures or you're looking at naturally made structures. This particular premise will be true for all of them. In the awwaliyat, it doesn't take any exceptions. But in any case, what Shaykh Mutahari did was he clearly disproved the idea and the notion that Hume was trying to put across to say that this major premise is one of those experimental premises, and he said, no, it is not one of the experimental premises, but we still believe in it, we are certain about it, therefore it must be one of those primary premises. And if it is a primary premise, it doesn't matter anymore, artificial structures or natural structures, it requires a designer, a sentient designer.
And what's the Hume's answer?
What's the Hume's answer? Well, when you go, inshallah, into Barzakh, and in the Akhirah, you can sit down with Mr. Hume, and you can ask him what is his answer. Hume was 17th century philosopher. Shaykh Mutahari came 2 centuries later.
Followers?
Some followers. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they have some answers to it. But you know what? Let's not try and get too complicated here. Let's at least appreciate this point that we've made right now. Okay? All right. Now you see why it's important to understand Ma'rifat Shanasi and how you can break down an argument if you understand this. Okay. Now, before I move on, what's the time right now? It's already 6:10. All right. I'll give you an assignment, and the assignment will be sent out, inshallah, by email. I'm just going to read out for you a paragraph. The paragraph is by Richard Dawkins. Some of you must have heard of that name. Richard Dawkins, the writer of The God Delusion, the most famous atheist right now in the 21st century, a person by the name of Richard Dawkins. A very interesting interview online between Mehdi Hassan and Richard Dawkins, which was done by Al Jazeera, and you can find it on YouTube. Okay, so you might want to go online and read that up or listen to it. Anyways, Mehdi Hassan, Dawkins. All right. Now, I'll send this quote out to you and a couple of other quotes via email, but just listen to it. I want you to tell me a few things about it. Question one is Richard Dawkins, in his quote, does he question the minor premise or does he question the major premise? 2, how would you model Richard Dawkins' argument? The reason Shaykh Mutahari was able to break down Hume's argument was first that he was able to model the argument, even better than Hume himself could have modeled the argument. Once he modeled it, he could break it down. All right? How would you model Richard Dawkins' argument? And then 3, how would you respond to his argument? So let me just read out the quote over here. He says, "We humans have purpose on the brain. We find it hard to look at anything without wondering what it is for, what the motive for it is, or the purpose behind it. When the obsession with purpose becomes pathological, it is called paranoia reading malevolent purpose into what is actually random bad luck. But this is just an exaggerated form of a nearly universal delusion. Show us almost any object or process, and it is hard for us to resist the why question, the what it is for question." Now the first question for you, major premise or minor premise? What's he questioning? The paragraph is not there. You don't have it. I'm just reading it out for you. We humans have purpose on the brain. We find it hard to look at anything without wondering what it is for and what the motive for it is or the purpose behind it. Minor or major? He's not questioning that every purpose needs a sentient designer. Richard Dawkins will come and tell you, I agree with you. Every purpose needs a sentient designer. But he says, show me purpose. It's your mind that is hardwired. We believe the mind is hardwired to see purpose. Not only I believe, not only the Quran says, but even recent research done, Justin Barrett, look up that name, all right, online. Even he argued, based on the studies that he had done at Oxford, that even children grow up believing in the existence of God because they are hardwired to believe that there is a purpose to everything, all right? So he says, I don't disagree that every design structure has a sentient designer. But are there design structures out there? Is there a purpose? So he's not questioning the major premise, he's questioning the minor premise, all right? Now the question is, how would you model his objection, and then how would you answer it? That's something for you to think about for next month, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.